Heading into the season, one of the biggest question marks around the league is always the Toronto Maple Leafs. Playing in the most brutal hockey city when it comes to pressure and media, there's always a buzz around this team wondering if they can finally get it done with their core four. But this year, their narrative has changed. Because for the first time in years, the Leafs might not have that core four at all. Mitch Marner, the engine behind so much of Toronto's transition game, power play, and puck possession, won't be there. That leaves Auston Matthews, William Nylander, and John Tavares to carry the majority of the offensive load without their best playmaker on the wing. So the question becomes, what do the Leafs look like without Marner? On paper, they still have two 40-plus goal scorers in Matthews and Nylander, but Marner's absence takes away the glue that held Toronto's top six together. He's the guy who controls pace, breaks pucks out cleanly, and creates space with his vision and playmaking. Without him, is it possible that the Leafs become too one-dimensional? The spotlight immediately shifts to guys like Matthew Knies and Mattias Maccelli, and even Max Domi. Can they elevate their games to fill the massive hole Marner leaves behind? And more importantly, can Berube adjust his system so that Matthews doesn't get smothered by defensive matchups now that Marner isn't there to draw attention away? And if the Leafs stumble and struggle without Marner, it raises the bigger question. Just how dependent was this team on Marner this whole time? Auston Matthews comes into the season with a lot to prove. Last year, he had just 33 goals and 78 points in 67 games, which would be pretty good for most other players not named Auston Matthews. 33 goals was his lowest goal total since he entered the league. Injuries definitely played a part, and even a down year, he was still producing at a point per game pace, so by no means was he ineffective. He is top 5 all-time in goals per game, so he's been consistent his entire career. This was probably just a one-off season with injuries and whatnot. The difference now is that he'll be doing it without Mitch Marner. For years, Marner was the playmaker who fed Matthews high-danger chances and allowed him to focus on finishing. Without him, Matthews might need to create more of his own looks. If we look back to his 69-goal season, he was regularly beating goalies clean with his signature toe drag shot and quick snapshot, but last year, a lot more of his goals came from tight to the net or off net front battles. He still flashed that elite shot every now and again, but there was a noticeable drop-off, and 4 of his goals came from empty nets compared to just 2 during that 69-goal campaign. That shift going closer to the crease could very well be linked to his nagging injury he seemed to carry all that year. He missed a stretch of games early in the season and didn't look quite himself at the Four Nations tournament either. So now the question is whether Matthews can get back to that dominance he showed just 2 years ago. Without Marner, he'll need to rely on William Nylander's playmaking and Matthew Knies' development to get him that puck in dangerous areas. If he doesn't rediscover that elite game-breaking form, Toronto's offense might not be able to hit the same heights that it has in previous years. And that brings us to William Nylander. If Matthews is going to stay among the league's elite without Marner, Nylander becomes the most important piece in making that all happen. Coming into the second year of his $11.5 million contract, the pressure on William Nylander is bigger than ever. He's proven himself as one of the NHL's most dynamic offensive weapons, finishing second in the league in goals behind Draisaitl this year. His shot, his speed, it all makes him nearly unstoppable when he's on, but the question now is whether he can evolve that from being just a pure scorer into a true dual threat, someone who can finish and distribute at a high level. This season might be the first real test of whether Nylander can step up and be the guy next to Auston Matthews. With Marner out, the Toronto Maple Leafs will be counting on him to not only bury chances, but to help drive offense and create opportunities for other players. In my opinion, he was the Leafs' most consistent forward during the playoffs. He showed up every game and he played with the kind of pace and urgency that the Leafs needed more of across the lineup. If that version of Nylander carries into the regular season, the Leafs have a legitimate answer to Marner's absence. But even if Matthews and Nylander play up to their superstar levels, the Leafs still need someone to take on that playmaking role Marner has owned for years. And that's where the spotlight shifts to Mattias Maccelli. I think he's one of the most underrated playmakers in the entire NHL. In a lot of ways, he has some Marner-like qualities when it comes to setting up teammates and seeing plays develop before they happen. But the question is whether he can actually step into Marner's shoes as the team's primary facilitator. Maccelli is coming off a down year, just 8 goals, 10 assists, and 18 points in 55 games. The year before that, though, he showed some real promise with 17 goals, 40 assists for 57 points across a full 82-game season. That version of Maccelli is what Toronto is hoping they get, a secondary playmaker who can open up space for Matthews, Nylander, and Tavares and keep defenses from locking in on a single option. Compared to Marner, Maccelli doesn't have the same pace, two-way presence, or consistency, but he does bring a similar creativity with the puck and can thread passes through tight lanes when he's super confident. The realistic expectation is that he develops into a strong second option, a guy who can complement Toronto's shooters and give them some much needed balance. But if he can't reach that level, the Leafs will feel the loss of Marner's playmaking even more. Beyond Maccelli, Matthews, and Nylander, another key piece to this puzzle is John Tavares, who quietly put together one of the better years of his career last season, finishing with 74 points in 75 games. At 34 years young, that's amazing, but the big question is whether he can keep producing at that level as a secondary scorer this year, and if the Leafs can even rely on him to be a secondary scorer. Without Marner in the lineup, Tavares might have to carry a little more weight on both sides of the puck. He's shown that he can center a line and handle tough matchups, but at this stage of his career, the Leafs need him to find the right balance, playing solid defense while still chipping in big goals when it matters. Staying steady in both areas could be the difference between this team holding strong or starting to slip. His contract makes it even more important. He's back on a 4-year deal at just $4.4 million a season, which is a bargain compared to what he would have gotten on the open market. Choosing to stay in Toronto on a team-friendly deal gives the Leafs a lot more flexibility with the rest of their roster, and now it's on Tavares to prove that he can keep being that reliable veteran who pulls his weight on and off the ice. And while the veterans are being counted on to stay steady, the spotlight also shifts to Toronto's younger core, and no young player has a bigger opportunity to make a leap this season than Matthew Knies. Knies has quietly become one of the most underrated pieces for Toronto. What makes him stand out isn't just what he does on the ice, it's how he carries himself off of it as well. He shows effort every single shift, he doesn't hide from hard work, and talks honestly about what this team needs, and fans are starting to notice that. He may not be here to replace Marner's offense, but he can definitely fill a different gap, the gap of energy, grit, and accountability. In a city that's tough to please, Knies is one of the players fans can believe in. He's not a flashy playmaker, but his hustle, his willingness to do the dirty work when battles in the corners and go to the net gives Toronto something they've needed more of. He's shown a real edge lately, more vocal, more present, more ready to own criticism, which means he's growing up into bigger roles. The Leafs will need that. With Marner out, guys like Knies could earn more top 6 minutes, including starts on Matthews' wing or shifts in high-pressure moments. If he can keep up the effort, keep pushing, and stay honest with himself and his teammates, Knies could be due for one of the biggest breakout stories of the season. For years, the Maple Leafs have been defined by their core four and a style built around high-end skill and offense, but without Marner, that identity is going to change whether they like it or not. Losing their best playmaker and arguably their best player forces them to lean more on depth, balance, and structure, something that they haven't done in a while. This could actually work in their favor. Guys like Knies, Domi, and even Dakota Joshua and Nick Waugh bring more grit and forechecking ability, which might push the Leafs toward playing a heavier, more north-south style. Instead of always looking for the perfect setup, this team might have to embrace creating chaos, winning puck battles, and scoring dirty goals. But the question is whether or not this is going to become a strength or a weakness for them. If the Leafs can build an identity that blends Matthews and Nylander's skill with a harder working supporting cast, they could end up being a tougher opponent to play against than in years past. But if they struggle to adjust, the absence of Marner's creativity will be obvious, and that team could get stuck between two identities without fully committing to either one. This season is going to say a lot about where the Maple Leafs stand as a franchise. In the short term, it's about proving they can still be a top contender without Mitch Marner in the lineup. If Matthews bounces back, Nylander steps up, and the supporting cast finds a way to mesh, the Leafs could actually come out of this looking deeper and more balanced. But in the long term, there's even more riding on it. If Toronto struggles, it'll highlight just how much they rely on Marner to drive their offense, and it could put a ton of pressure on the management when it comes to contracts and the future of this core. Either way, this year is going to redefine what the Maple Leafs are. For the first time in a while, it's not just about the core four carrying them. It's about finding out what this team looks like when one of those pieces goes missing.